Answer me this. If your boss were to come to you and increase your salary by $200,000 a year, so whatever it is, increase it by $200,000 a year, what effect would that have on your credit score? The answer is none. What if you inherited $1 million? What if I just said, hey, you're a nice person, I'm going to write you a check for $1 million, go ahead and cash it? What would be the impact on your credit score? Sadly, again, the answer would be none. Because here's the truth of the matter. The credit score is not an indicator of winning financially. Hi, I'm Mike Potter, and I'd like to welcome you to the True Wealth Financial Show, a show dedicated to providing Christians with the information and inspiration to successfully navigate financial decisions, intentionally build wealth, and retire with confidence so that they can focus on the more important aspects of life. I appreciate you taking the time to tune in today. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Additionally, you can find more information on our website at www.truewealth.show. And now, let's get on to this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the True Wealth Show. As always, thanks for taking the time to tune in, watch, or listen to this week's show. Great job on continuing to invest in your financial future. Psalms 49:13 says, "This their way is their folly, yet their posterity approve their sayings." Selah. Samuel White said in relation to the credit score, "The greatest capitalistic scam of the century." That's what he referred to as the credit score for. You say, well, why does it say that? Well, that's exactly what I want to unpack today. I want to discuss the credit score and why I believe it to be a fool's game. But first, let's transition away a little bit from credit score because there's a lot of emotions, a lot of embedded history with that, like a lot of psychological, behavioral associated with it. And let's go to a different field altogether. Let's say you go to the mall and you go into the Apple store. And when you walk into the Apple store, you say, yeah, I think I would like to buy a new iPad. And the lady or the guy who's helping you says, okay, great. By chance, do you happen to know your Apple score? And you say, your Apple score? What do you mean? What's that? Well, we have a thing called an Apple score, and everybody has one. And so we were wondering what yours were, because if your Apple score is too low, we might not allow you to buy a product. You might have to, kind of come back and change some things to raise your score. But, let me just check your score real quick and we can see where it is. And so she's like, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have a good Apple score. And he's like, well, how do I get my Apple score better? Oh, well, that's easy. So the more devices that you buy from us, the higher your Apple score is. And the more time you spend on those devices, that's why we have that screen time. It's not really to track, you, it's really to help us kind of track you. And so the more you're on your devices, the better your Apple score. Now, if you use like a Motorola or a Samsung or something like that, you don't get credit for those. Android, you don't get any credit for those. But as long as you're on an Apple device, with time, your Apple score goes up. And the more apps that you download and you use, the multiple of apps, every time you download apps, your Apple score goes up. Anytime you delete an app, unfortunately, your score will go down a little bit. And so we need you to have at least a 750 Apple score for you to buy a device. And you go in like, wait a minute, I want to buy an iPad. Can I buy an iPad? Sorry, sir, your Apple score is just not quite good enough. Do you have some Apple devices? Yeah. Okay, so go home and use those for like the next month or so, a lot, like 12, 14, 16 hours a day, and your Apple score go up, and we can come back in and we'll see if you qualify to buy one of our products. Right? If you went into the Apple store and that really happened, you'd be like, you people have lost your ever-loving mind. You'd be like, you guys are crazy. And yet this is exactly what banks have done with the credit score. And we, the suckers, are playing the game. It's a win-win for them and a lose-lose for us. I'm going to show you why. But first of all, let's go back a little bit. So let's talk about the origin of what is now known as the credit score, where it wasn't known that until like the last 25, 30 years or so. But in the 1950s, really banks started using computerized credit scoring. So they used statistical analysis to create an abstract risk assessment to determine credit worthiness around it. They're trying to wrap their heads around underwriting, right? Prior to that, everything was kind of standardized, right? So you would go in with an application for a loan and Sally would review it and it would go one way and Bob would review another person's and could go the complete opposite. There was no standardization. And so in order to solve that, the Fair Isaac Corporation started by William Fair and Earl Isaac. It's a corporation. That's where we call it the word FICO, F-I-CO, Fair Isaac Corporation. And the idea was to try to create systematic ways of resolving whether or not someone should get a loan or not. And the idea of that is the organization would kind of give them this standardized way of doing it, this process, this algorithm, if you will. But then in return, they would take that information, share with other banks, because what would happen prior to that was I could apply for a loan here. That could be an underwriting. I could go to a different bank over here. That would also be an underwriting. And the one bank wouldn't know that I was applying for other credit, the other one. So I could walk away with potentially two different loans, and the other banks didn't know that I had that loan. And so the idea is that they would share the information kind of around. FICO didn't go public as a company until 1987. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac didn't start using FICOs until 1995. So, a little over 30 years ago. Prior to 1980, the advice to go build your credit was seldomly rehearsed by anyone. And so the credit score as we know it, it's a relatively new phenomenon. It didn't exist forever. Like your grandparents were never told to go build their credit, right? Maybe your parents were, depending on your age, but your grandparents certainly weren't. And so the question then is, what composes of the credit score? Now, the actual algorithms and how it's calculated and stuff, we don't really know. It's kind of like secret sauce, right? It's like Chick-fil-A's breading or Colonel Sanders' recipe, right? We don't really know the actual ingredients of it per se and the quantities of it, but we know the composition of it. So on FICO's website, they tell you the percentage and the components of what the score is. Most people think it just has to do with their payments. As long as I pay my payments on time, I have a good score. But that's not truly the entire picture. It's really based upon 5 different categories, right? So payment history is one for sure. So is the amount of debt you have, the length of debt you have, the type of debt you have, and how much new debt you have, right? And so let's break those down a little bit and compare kind of each one and determine maybe who would have the better score, me or you. Right. So let's say, for example, the first one, payment history, right? This has to do with paying your payments on time. So if I have paid all my payments on time, I've never been late, but you have some 30 days, a couple 60 days, maybe 190 days late in the last couple of years, right? My score would be better than yours, which makes sense because I'm more reliable, right? I'm more trustworthy. I'm paying my payments on time, whereas maybe you've been late on a couple, right? So that's kind of a no-brainer. But let's think about length of debt. Let's say, for example, I am almost 47 years old. Let's say I've been in debt since I was 18, which I probably was in debt at 18. And so if I would have been in debt from the age 18 all the way till now, that's almost 30 years of debt. I have a history of debt, of being in debt for 30 years. But maybe you're only in your late 20s or early 30s, and you've only been in debt for 20 years or 15 years. Well, I would have a longer period of time of being in debt. So my score of that portion would be better than yours because I have 30 years and you only maybe have 20 or 15, right? Which is kind of interesting, so my score would be better because I've been in debt longer. That's kind of interesting. All right, what about debt types, right? So the amount of types that you have, the better. So for example, let's just say you just have a mortgage. That's all you have. You have a mortgage and that's it. Well, I have a mortgage, but I have a second mortgage, a HELOC loan. Maybe I have a car loan. Maybe I have some student loans, and I have credit card loans, and I have a boat loan, and I have a signature loan, and I have a consolidation loan, and I have 3 other credit cards, right? I have more types of debt than you do. You only have 1. You have a mortgage. Maybe I have 10. Well, my score would be better than your score because I have more types of debt than you do. Interesting. So the more types of debt you have, the higher the score. Interesting. Who would want you to have more types of debt? That's interesting. Okay, what about new debt, right? So new debt is the idea that you've recently gone into debt. So let's say, for example, you only have a mortgage and you got your mortgage 10 years ago. That's all you've had. You haven't gotten any new debt in the last 10 years. But I love debt, and so therefore I get debt every year. Every year I'm getting a new loan, right? And so I got a loan this year, I got a loan last year, I got a year loan before that. And every year, because I have all these debts, I have some sort of new loan every year. Whose best score would be better, yours or mine? Well, it would be mine because I have more recent debt. So again, who would want you to have more recent debt and reward you with a score for it? Maybe the bank, maybe. And this one is the best one. So when it comes to the amount of debt, this is great. So I actually want to kind of transition to a PowerPoint that I'll show you exactly how that works. Okay, so when it comes to the amount of debt, this is how I understand it to be. And so let's say, for example, you go get yourself a credit card. And for example, this credit card has a $10,000 limit. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm never going to have $10,000 of credit. I'm just going to have it for emergencies. I get some free points, I'll just go ahead and get one. And so something happens to you, and for some reason, Christmas sneaks up on you. You forget that it's in December, and you go out and you buy a whole bunch of stuff, and you charge up $2,500 worth of stuff, right? You figure, I'll just pay it off next year, not a big deal. Well, what happens to your credit score? Well, your credit score will actually go up because, while you have this credit card, you're far away from it being maxed out. You're demonstrating, that you're responsible, you're doing good with things, and so your credit score goes up, you get rewarded. Okay, and you're like, man, this is great. Like, I got some stuff. I didn't really pay anything. The payment's only $50 a month. My score went up. Man, America's a great place. What a place to live, right? And so you go out and let's charge some more up. And so you go on a vacation and you spend a nice time, and you end up charging $2,500 more on your credit card, and now your balance is $5,000. Well, what happens to your score? It again goes up. You're like, man, what a place. This is awesome. I had Christmas. I had a great vacation. And so, you go out and your score's going up. And you're like, man, this is awesome. And so now you have a car repair. And it's like, oh, man, I didn't really expect to have a car repair. Who knew cars broke down? This is an emergency. I got to have the car to go to work. And so you charge up the credit card again, and now you're at $7,500 of recurring balance, and your score goes down. You're like, wait a minute, I don't understand. I went from 0 to 25, then 25 to 50, and it went up both times. How comes now I went up another 2,500, it goes down? Because while they gave you a card worth $10,000 limit, they didn't actually expect you to use it. And it's like, wait a minute, this is kind of getting close to being full. And, we're not really sure what's happening here. You're not being very responsible with your credit all of a sudden. It's like the game changes. That's the thing that always kind of kills me. You see, you run into another snag and you charge it up again and your score goes down again. Yeah, like, man, this is ridiculous. I have this card. It's maxed out. I'm paying payments every month now, $400. And look at this, 22% interest. This is dumb. My score's going down. This is silly. We're going to pay this thing off. And so you start paying it off. And so you pay it off and you pay it down to $7,500. Well, what happens? Your score. Well, your score goes up from where it was because it maxed out, and now you pay it back down. You're like, okay, this is better. And so you keep paying it down, you pay it down again. What happens to your score? It goes up again. You're all right, now we're kind of back on track. This makes sense. I'm paying this sucker off. I learned my lesson. These aren't good for people. They're kind of like cigarettes of the financial services world. Don't want these things. And so you pay it down again, $2,500. What happens to your score? Wait a minute, my score goes down? Yeah, your score goes down. And if you pay it all the way off, your score will go down again. And you've probably heard this one before. Don't ever close a credit card because your credit score will go down. But if you close it, yeah, your score will go down again. Why is that? Because this part, the amount of the credit score, is designed. The optimal score, again, if that's what you're trying to solve for, the optimal score is to keep somewhere between 25 to 50% of the value of your credit continually. Well, who would want you to continually have a revolving balance? Maybe the banks. Because now you're continually in debt, you're continually paying payments, you're continually paying interest, and that interest that you pay is revenue for them. And so that is how the credit score works in terms of that section. Crazy, huh? So isn't that amazing, right? So here's the credit score in a nutshell. You have to go into debt often with many different types, continue to go in debt so you build your history, pay the payments on time, and have the right amount of debt, not too much, not too little, but just right, like a Goldilocks porridge. How ironic is that? And so when you think about this, you think about the impact of it. Answer me this. If your boss were to come to you and increase your salary by $200,000 a year, so whatever it is, increase it by $200,000 a year, what effect would that have on your credit score? The answer is none. What if you inherited $1 million? What if I just said, hey, you're a nice person, I'm going to write you a check for $1 million, go ahead and cash it? What would be the impact on your credit score? Sadly, again, the answer would be none. Because here's the truth of the matter. The credit score is not an indicator of winning financially. It's an indicator of you're going into debt a lot, often, staying in debt, paying payments on time, paying interest on time, and repeating the cycle over and over and over and over again. The only thing that changes your credit score is your interaction with debt. So when someone says, I have a great credit score, I kind of feel bad for them. I kind of look at them like, oh, you poor thing. Because that means you've gone into debt a lot and paid payments a lot and paid interest a lot. The only reason you would have a high credit score, why would you want one, is to go into debt. Why would you go into debt? To raise my credit score. Why? To go into debt. Why? To raise my credit. It's like a dog chasing its tail and calling it progress. It is silly. The only way to truly maximize your score, if that is your goal for some reason, is to go into debt repeatedly, often, with many different types, optimizing the right amount of balances and paying payments with interest every month. That, my friends, is why the credit score is a fool's game, which really shouldn't be played by anyone. Now, what is important? What is important is your credit report. Your credit report shows all of your history, right? And so that is a good thing to check frequently. The government allows all three bureaus allows you to get a free report of them every year. So you can get essentially 3 a year if you want to. That is a good thing to check for a couple of reasons. One, for accuracy. Two, for identity theft. And so that is a good thing to do, to go in and check your credit report, not the score. Don't pay for a score, but to go in and check your credit report often. It'll have your whole list of all the years when you first went into debt. It'll have your information where you lived, the balances of them, whether they're closed or they're open. And a good thing to do is go through this. Once I help get my clients out debt, I tell them to go through their credit report, pull everything out, make sure everything is closed. And that way you have no open accounts. And the other thing too is identity theft occurs, right? So somebody gets a loan in your name and you don't even know about it. The mail doesn't come to you, it goes somewhere else. Well, it'll show up on the credit report where you can then challenge it as fraudulent activity. So that is a good thing to do. If you haven't checked your credit report recently, I'd recommend you do that. If you don't know how to do that, you can send an email to mike@truewealth.show. Put the word credit in subject, CREDIT, and I will send you a step-by-step of instructions of how to get a free credit report. For those of you who are on our mailing list, you will get a link of those instructions on Friday as well. Your micro action for the week is to do that. Check your credit report for accuracy and or fraud. Today, we talked about the credit score, the origins of it, the compositions of it, the impact of it, the folly of it associated with an Apple score, and how to check your actual annual credit report. I hope this information is helpful for you on your financial journey. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below or send an email to mike@truewealth.show. And until next time, hope you have a great day. Thanks again for taking the time to watch this week's episode of the True Wealth Financial Show. I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Additionally, you can find more information on our website at www.truewealth.show. One final note, though, as we wrap up to today's show. While I hope the information was helpful, valuable, and insightful, it's really for information and educational purposes only. Prior to making any decisions or taking any actions, I'd strongly encourage you to talk to your legal, tax, estate, or financial advisor who's familiar with the unique circumstances of your particular personal situation. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, hope you have a great day.